Computer. Okay, as you remember, we didn't meet last week. The week before, we were week number 6 in Numbers, talking about Numbers chapter 15 to 19, but we did not kind of finish it. So, kind of quickly in last week or 2 weeks ago, we're talking about some laws and regulations, the rebellion of the priests, and that's where we kind of left off. And then I'm going to talk about Aaron's budding staff and the laws of purification.
Mm.
Okay, so if you kind of look at the breakdown of the chapter uh, 2 weeks ago, this is kind of what it looked like. We talked about the laws and the sacrifices, remembering that the people had rebelled, and that chapter 15 with these laws and chapters were really about God's grace. That even in the midst of rebellion, even in the midst of walking away, God still wants to have a relationship with us. There's this ongoing, undying desire by God to reach out to us, and that now kind of sets us up for our faith today. Okay, then we talked a little bit about this idea of first bread. This was an offering that was given, and it could only be given by a conquering people once they had settled in the land, because to break bread or to make bread takes a little bit of time. And as I understand from the conversation, sometimes it takes special water too. That water from the tap just doesn't do it because it kills yeast. Uh, but the whole idea here with this the baking of the bread was that it was for a people who are settled, but also it was something that it was a daily occurrence. And so this gift of first bread was the kind of the reminder that every day in the mundane things, in the working of our day to day, we're trying to remember God. And we had a long conversation about how we can kind of try to incorporate this type of idea into our own lives. Talked about offering for sin, and that if we do sin, there is a requirement of atonement, and God provides for that as well. And then talked about this idea of the uh, fringes on the edge of clothing and blue cords as a way that, even in their dressing, in their day to day, they take along with them reminders of their relationship with God. And we talked a little bit about, how we could do similar things in our life. And then we get to Korah's rebellion. Korah was the priests. And so it kind of, when we're thinking about this idea of rebellion, that it wasn't just the people, that now it had seeped its way into the Levites. So Korah was a Levite, not a priest. So the Levites against the priests, this big jealousy between the Levites uh, and the priests. Okay. Um, and as we kind of looked at that and thought about that, we looked at it in light of the rebellions that, basically what has happened. We started with the outer ring of the people, and now it's gone to the most center rings. So it becomes sort of a reminder that rebellion is a systemic thing in the community.
Mm.
Okay. Um, and now we get to chapter 17. That's kind of where we left off. So if you can tee up in your Bibles, chapter 17, going to give you excuse me, a second or two to skim the chapter, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So go ahead and take a minute or two.
Missed something here.
You know, when you had the note on one of the slides that said something about the budding of Aaron's staff, I thought that meant like staff, like people, and that there was like increasing personnel.
Ah, okay. So it's not that. All right. Everybody have a chance to kind of skim the chapter real quick. It's not that long.
No, and also it's funny that we were talking about Brussels sprouts for
There
this.
you go. All right. So as you look at the chapter, in fact, it's short. So why don't I just read it real quick? So this actually comes from the English Standard Version. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and get from them staffs, one for each father's house, from all of their chiefs according to their fathers' houses, 12 staffs. Write each man's name on his staff, and write Aaron's name on the staff of Levi. For there shall be one staff for the head of each father's house. Then you shall deposit them in the tent of meeting before the testimony, where I meet with you. And the staff of the man whom I choose shall sprout. Thus I will make to cease from me the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against you." Moses spoke to the people of Israel, and all their chiefs gave him staffs, one for each chief, according to their fathers' houses, 12 staffs. And the staff of Aaron was among their staffs. And Moses deposited the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the testimony. On the next day, Moses went into the tent of testimony, and behold, the staff of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. Then Moses brought out all the staffs from before the Lord to all the people of Israel. And they looked, and each man took his staff. And the Lord said to Moses, "Put back the staff of Aaron before the testimony to be kept as a sign for the rebels, that you may make an end of their grumblings against me, lest they die." Thus did Moses, as the Lord commanded him, so he did. And the people of Israel said to Moses, "Behold, we perish, we are undone, we are all undone. Everyone who comes near to the tabernacle of the Lord shall die, are we to perish." All right, so as you listen to that, what's happening in this chapter?
Well, it sounds like there was a lot of grumblings because nobody wanted to give up any power. They didn't want to admit that the Levites had, or the sons of Aaron or whatever, had a lot of power, and God brought them all together and said, "Okay, bring everybody's if you've seen a coronation, they have a staff. Bring everybody's staff, and the one that flowered was Aaron's. So that proves that the Levites were the priestly class."
Okay. Yeah. So if we want to put this this chapter in context, then it comes on the heels of Korah's rebellion. Remember, it's the priests that have rebelled, but it's also another group of people. And so with this rebellion, what happened? What happened at the end of the rebellion?
Aaron was picked.
What's that?
Aaron was picked.
Okay, Aaron was picked. Yep. Remember, this is the chapter where we had the dueling censers. So we have this rebellion happening, and they have these censors that were kind of brought out, and there was dueling, and it says that at the end of this, and Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces, and Moses and Aaron said, "Take your censer, put fire on it from the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them." for wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun. So Aaron took it, as Moses said, and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put the incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now, those who died in the plague were what? 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah. So, here we have this grumbling. And this grumbling is really a grumbling about privilege, about calling. So what was the beef between the Levites and the priests? What was this beef they were having?
Isn't that where the Levites thought that they were the keepers, so to speak, and the priests thought that they were above the Levites?
Yeah, so kind of. So when we think about the tribe, the Levitical tribe, the whole tribe itself is charged with maintenance and protection and operation of the tabernacle. Now, within that Levitical tribe, the one clan, the clan of Aaron, was picked and set apart to be the priests. So, all are part of this operation of the temple, but it was only the priests that had the privilege of kind of moving into the holy place and one into the Holy of Holies, and were charged with offering sacrifices. So you can kind of think about I guess maybe some way to do it is, if you think about a church, you have let's talk about let's do it. We're familiar with our Catholic brothers and sisters. The reason I do that is because the priestly role sort of has a little bit of a hierarchical kind of thing. So, within that, within the administration of the service, the priest has sort of this unfettered ability to move, across the altar rail, move up the stairs, and be in proximity of the tabernacle that's there. However, other people can't ascend the stairs. Other people can't go beyond the altar rail. And so, that there was this kind of perceived privilege, or maybe perceived power, and a bit of jealousy. So you had the people that couldn't go into the holy place and offer sacrifices, but their job was just as significant and just as important, because they provided and supported the priestly role, but also without them, the tabernacle wouldn't be. So you kind of see this little kind of jealousy thing that's happening. I don't want to be the the custodial person. I want to be the priest. And so that's the rebellion that's happening. And because of that rebellion, there was a price to pay. And God, swallowed up or sent a plague, and 14,700 people died, those that were involved in the rebellion, but some of them were their family as well. Okay. And so that's the context from which 17 comes. And so as you think about this, then what's 17 all about? What's chapter 17 all about? What's this budding staff about?
Is this correlating to the recent gospels that we've had over the last couple of weeks, where they're arguing as to who's the better apostle, who's so
I guess maybe, yeah, sort of, kind of. In a way, I mean that, when we think about the Gospels, and we think about this idea of privilege. Okay, they wanted to be who could be closest to Jesus, because they wanted that perceived power, and you know the ability to be close to that, and some of the idea, yeah, the priests here are kind of closer to God, I guess, have more power, that kind of thing. So yeah, you could see sort of similar types of things there.
and is this where you have the breakout concept of it's not about the people, it's about God and the relationship.
Uh, say more about that.
It, they've got to respect him more and do as he says, and accept their lot in life, so to speak, versus them having a say as to
Mm,
who gets closer. It's not up to them as the people, it's up to God's decision.
right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And I think that's the exact thing, or part of the message of chapter 17 is, in some ways, it's a reaffirmation and a reminder of God's call on the Levites and God's call on the priests in particular. That, that call, that ability, that privilege that one has, to move closer to God and be in the divine presence, is a privilege, but it's a privilege that's offered by God. And it's not something that they had done. Um, if you think about the Levites, what did they do to earn the right to be, a Levite, to be one of those people that ministers in the temple?
Nothing, they were chosen.
They were nothing. They were chosen. Okay. And so, what God is doing in the midst of this grumbling and this jealousy is reminding the people that, it's God's choosing and not them. So as you think about this, then, theologically, what's the writer saying?
God is still God,
Okay, God's still God.
and God's plan will go forward, um, even if the people are trying to get around it somehow.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
God's given them another chance. He still wants, he's still giving them the chance to have that relationship and for them to trust in him.
Okay.
They're still not happy.
Who's not happy?
The Israelites still aren't happy. It just seems like they're constantly either fighting with each other, or they just can't seem to get along.
Well, yeah. So if you think about this, then, what does this have to say to us today? I mean, it's okay. It's it was important in Aaron's time and Numbers, but if we're in the 21st century here,
Mhm.
21st century Christians looking at this scripture. So what does it have to say to us today? In what ways does it have bearing and impact on our lives today?
Maybe like verse 5, God is saying that the staff belonging to the man I choose will sprout, and I will rid myself of the constant grumbling. So the today, the you know the people that God chooses to do God's work will bear fruit, maybe.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
I guess to us, it's talking about us grumbling, and not trusting.
Okay.
And we tend to want to still do things our own way instead of God's way.
Okay. So you say we're still a grumbling people.
I think at times, yes.
Okay.
I think at times, we still grumble.
Does this have anything to say about calling?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I guess that's sort of what I was trying to get at in verse 5 is that when it says the man I choose, right? So it's who is called.
Okay, so it has to, so in some ways then I guess we could think about it in the sense that, you know, there are certain individuals that have been called, and they're called primarily by God's invitation and not by their own, to be set aside, for the work of the tabernacle or the work of the church.
But don't we all have callings?
I'm not saying that everybody doesn't have a calling. I'm just saying that there are certain folks that have a call to the church. If we think about the New Testament, we especially think about the writings of Paul. And even you don't even have to go there. Let's go back a little bit. And let's go back to Exodus. Okay. And when God called Moses, he also called the people. So Moses was going to be what? Going to be a prophet and a leader to the Israelite people. And then the Israelite people were going to be prophets and leaders to the rest of the world. So all of us are called. All of us are called to be in ministry. All of us are called, to represent Jesus in the world. But within that calling, there are certain folks that have been called to kind of minister in some unique way at, kind of within the church. And so we begin to see some of that here. And so as you look at this, then what is the role? Okay, if you look at this, what is the role? That's where we go from here. You got this chapter 17 is that reaffirmation that there is a call on a group of people. And then where do we need to go from there? What is what is that calling? And so if you kind of still have your thumbs in your Bibles and you kind of scroll on down, if we look at chapter 18, okay, it talks about the duties of the priests and the Levites. And then if we go back down to chapter 19, which kind of finishes out this section, we have laws for purification. So if we kind of think about this little section for a minute, we kind of started out. Let me go back to the beginning. We started out laws, rebellion, and atonement. So the laws were to remind us that God still pursues us. But even when we're being pursued, we're rebelling. But then God also gives us ways to be restored into relationship. So let me get back to where I was at before. So let's talk a little bit about some of this stuff here. As we talked about laws, we talked about rebellion, then we talked about atonement and purification. So I think this becomes sort of a blueprint in some ways, for us as well. I mean, I'm not talking about we needing to drill down to some of those individual laws, but if we kind of pull back a little bit, go like the 60,000-foot view, we got this blueprint. And in some ways, does this look similar to what we see in the New Testament? Yes, no, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, isn't that what
Yeah.
Mark was saying earlier? A little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. All right. So, as we think about this idea then of the atonement and purification, kind of just skim through there, look at chapter 19 for a minute. That's a little bit of a longer one, so just skim.
Oh, oh yeah, we're wash, rinse, and repeat. We're going back to the beginning where you have all these very particulars of being unclean, and
Mm-hmm.
if this happens, you're unclean for this many days, and if this happens, so you're rehashing things again. It's like you said, the bookends. The center is unique, and as you go out, you get the same thing on both sides.
Right. So, as you think about that, then you think about this kind of as a blueprint. You kind of look at these laws yet again. You know, how does that kind of impact us today? Because I mean, when we hear the words atonement, what do we typically think about?
Like a repayment.
A repayment.
Sacrifice.
Right, a sacrifice. And so for us as Christians, how did that atonement happen?
Through Christ on the cross.
Right, it happened through Christ on a cross, and in our Christian understandings, Christ died once and for all, right?
Mhm.
And so that what's the challenge of being a person back in the time of Moses and Aaron?
They had to keep
Sacrificing and
repeating.
atoning over and over and over again.
Right,
Mhm.
right. So this idea of being clean and then unclean, then sin, was this kind of circular pattern that required, sacrifice over and over and over again. But now you fast forward, Jesus has replaced the temporary nature of those sacrifices. And so his sacrifice on the cross has achieved atonement once and for all. Right?
Yes.
And so we like that, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay. But so while that's the good, what's the maybe the bad of that?
Lest we forget, and it doesn't become personal.
Okay. Yeah. So lest we forget. And so, we got that once and done. And then, you then forget. And in some ways, how can I put this?
We kind of take it for granted.
Yeah, we absolutely take it for granted. And it's like, in some ways in our head, it's like, well, I can sin because I know I'm going to be forgiven.
Oh,
Right. And so actually it's kind of interesting right now. I'm doing a course on Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
mm.
And does anybody know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
About his that one book from Metaxas or whatever.
Yeah, that's that was one of his biographies.
But he also wrote Cheap Grace.
Yes, he wrote a couple of books. One book is I think it was called Discipleship.
The Cost of Discipleship.
Yep, The Cost of
I
Discipleship.
have it. I
Oh,
tried
yeah.
to read it, but the language is like so, I wouldn't say stilted, but it doesn't flow the way we
Yeah.
speak.
Well,
And it was
somebody
difficult to
translated
get
out of
through.
German.
Old fashioned, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, he was around in and around the time of
Hitler.
Nazi Germany.
Mhm.
He grew up in Germany. Decided that he wanted to be a theologian. I think he actually had 2 PhDs. Actually came over to the States for a while.
Mhm.
And for a year stayed in New York City, did a postdoc
Theological.
at Union, and spent some time in Harlem at a Baptist church. Was very much affected by that, went back to Nazi Germany and started at the underground seminary. Also became part of the resistance and part of a plot to what's the word?
Overthrow.
Not overthrow, actually kill Hitler.
Mhm.
And he was actually arrested and executed. So that's sort of Bonhoeffer's life. But in one of these, he wrote in Discipleship, the Cost of Discipleship. He talks about grace. I think it was Jeanette that said something about cheap grace.
Mhm.
What do you know about cheap grace, Jeanette?
Well, that was how he thought about it. We don't appreciate it, and we don't realize what was done for us.
Right. So in some ways, as I think it was Sue said, we take it for granted.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, that's I think one of the challenges that we have, especially within our Protestant, praxis or Protestant practices. Okay, Christ died on the cross for you and I. It was one-time sacrifice, and now, we're forgiven. Our Catholic brothers and sisters have similar thoughts, similar things, but as part of their praxis, they have the sacrament of reconciliation. So they have in place now. I never liked going to confession. It was not one of my fun things to do. But what it did do is it created a space for you to take pause, for you to remember, okay, that, we do sin, that we do mess up, and that there is a cost to play. And it can make, and by the very act of confession, it makes us uncomfortable. And in some ways, I think, do I want to go back to ancient Israel and have to sacrifice all the time and have that temporary thing? No, I prefer Jesus. But in some ways, then we need to be able to put into place this idea that, clean and unclean, and, this need and kind of a respect for, the sacrifices that were made. What thoughts on that?
I mean, I kind of want to say, and this is not right, but that it's there as a safety net, like, so that if you think of it that way, so you don't, it's not, it's free, but it's not free. So I'm not articulating this. I'm thinking of it in terms, this is a terrible comparison, but so if my ninth graders fail an assessment, they can do a retake, but there's some conditions that they have to meet, kind of like not going to confession, but saying your 10 Hail Marys, but it's, you have to meet with me, you have to do written corrections, and then you have to attend the help clinic 3 times a week until the next assessment, and this is all to make up your grade, but there's a safety net there.
It's like community service for a lawbreaker.
Yeah, but just like saying, okay, I'm not going to let you fail. I will catch you, but don't take it for granted that you're going to pass the class, and just don't not study for everything just because you can like mess it, it allows you to mess up, but I got you in case you do.
Right.
Sounds almost like the sacrifices.
Say that again, Sue. I didn't hear you.
I said it sounds almost like the sacrifices.
Right.
Yeah, you can get through, but you have to do all
X,
these
Y, and
things
Z.
instead of like sacrificing a bull or a goat.
Yeah,
Right.
you got to go out in the woods and be unclean for 7 days, and
Right.
It's don't take it for granted, but just in case. But we don't. We often do take it for granted, I think.
I
I
do.
think we always do.
And so as I would agree with everybody else that we all do that. And so as we think about that, how can we maybe become a bit more sensitive and in some ways more appreciative of the work that Jesus did, and be less, take it less for granted?
well, they say that, when your kid starts to drive and he wants his own car, you can give him a car, or he could work for the money to pay for the car. And they typically will appreciate it more in the long run if they work for it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means they got to put the effort in. So coming full circle with your question, you have to be more involved and more committed and do more than not,
Okay.
I think.
That kind of, to me, slides a little bit. I think you're right in concept, Mark, but it slides a little bit more into the Catholic side where you can earn it.
So I think, we kind if kind of in some ways hearing correctly. You know, it's we need to walk the tightrope between sort of faith and grace on one side and works on the other. That, you know, our salvation is a free gift. We can't work to earn it. But as a sort of byproduct of that faith, we do works.
Kind of like missionary would be a good example.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
But also we try not to mess up.
Right.
And we do because we're humans, but we try not to. But we then have to, you know, confess when we have done so and say, okay, please forgive me. I am so sorry. I will try again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what it's called? The missionaries, like the people that went down to South America and
Mhm.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
You know, it's go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, but you don't have to be a missionary to be like trying to fulfill your calling.
no, but I'm
Sure.
saying that would be an example where you have your belief and your faith and your freebie, if you will, but yet you gotta pay back, and that's how they pay back.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, in some ways it's the other as I kind of brought up Bonhoeffer and this idea that you know, cheap grace. And so in some ways, what do you think the antidote for cheap grace is?
Confession.
Not it wasn't confession. For Bonhoeffer, it's discipleship.
Mhm.
And so what in some ways, you know, as I think about that and I read about that, you know, I'm kind of taken to Wesley. And
Hmm.
so, you know, Wesley was, you know, about, you know, on a quest for, you know, pietism. He was on a quest for you know, revitalization and you know, within the church, but also personal. And so how did Wesley accomplish that?
Well, rigor, but that's why I would like push back on that a little bit, almost saying, you know, for all of the waking up before the sun came
Uh,
up and the all of the stuff that Wesley did until that moment when he had that, you know, strangely warmed heart, all of that other stuff wasn't necessarily
right, right.
doing it.
But I'm sorry, my question must be was a bad question because where I was going with is not so much his personal life because yeah, that was, you know, he made himself nuts trying to do that kind of stuff and in some ways, you know, pointed out that, you know, it's not about works. The harder he worked, the further he felt he was away from God, and it wasn't
Yeah.
until he actually just was there and almost kind of had surrendered and allowed God to, you know, allowed himself to be found by God, that he had his personal thing. But what I was talking about more was in the line of, you know, the Wesleyan movement. And so, you know, atonement and purification, that pietism, you know, becoming, you know, kind of closer to God was important to Wesley, you know, as he saw the growth and the movement and the way that he chose to do that was not individually.
Yeah.
Okay, it wasn't individually. It was you know, in groups, you know, in the bands and the clans. No, yeah, bands and clans that they small groups that would come together. And why would they come together? Well, they'd come together for study, but they'd also come together for prayer. they'd also come together for confession. So, it was, you think about this group of people, let's talk 10 people, 12 people that were, in a group and that were responsible for one another and accountable to one another. And in some ways they lived life together. And their goal was to move each one, closer to God. So, in some ways, that was their response to this idea of maybe cheap grace. So it's discipleship and that kind of thing. And I think in some ways, we, as more ruggedly individualistic people, lose that. Will we get together? Sure. Will we pray? Sure. But not really pray a whole bunch, but we'll pray a little bit. Will we study the word? Sure, we'll do that. But in some ways, we keep a lot of who we are and what we're about, the struggles we have, close to the close to the breast.
Yeah, I probably mentioned this before. Maybe I haven't. I don't know. But when I was in college, we used to have in our Christian fellowship group, we had prayer partners, and we would meet like once a week, or I don't remember how. I know it was at least once a week, but I remember there was this like weird little room. If you've ever been on the Swarthmore campus, there's a huge building called Parish Hall, and like up near the top of the cupola in the huge hall, there's this little skinny, it looks like a deep, deep, deep closet. And we would go in there. It was open, and just like me and my prayer partner would just go in there once weekly and like be at the kind of like top of the hill on campus with this skinny little window with light coming in. And it was just really powerful to just be in there for an hour in the middle of all our chaos and classes and just pray with each other. And sometimes we would sit there quiet, and sometimes we would say stuff out loud, but it was really important.
Hmm.
Other thoughts? Everybody's just been wowed into silence.
Well, the Jewish holiday Rosh Hashanah, isn't that a Day of Atonement?
Yes, yes. It kind of takes the place of the day that the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies.
Oh,
Yeah, so it would be kind of, comparable to that, since they don't have this sacrificial system anymore.
mm,
So I just kind of think that, as we kind of leave this part of Numbers and think about this kind of blueprint that's kind of been left for us, reminding us that, we have God's laws. Okay. We don't even have to think about, all the 610 laws, the Jewish laws. We can think about the two that Jesus gave us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. Obedience to that.
mm,
How many times do we rebel? And, what's the consequences? And then is atonement and purification. I think the other thing, as we think about this atonement and purification piece, is if we think about, the laws that we had talked about. Let me see if I can find it. When we're looking at the offerings for sin, okay, and we look at this section, it talks some about individual sin, but first and foremost, it talked about corporate sin. Okay. And so there's a high regard for the community and a high regard that, when we do sin, when we do rebel, sin isn't just an individual thing. It has ripple effects. It affects others. And in some ways we need to begin to look at this kind of blueprint here more holistically and more communally than we do from an individual standpoint. So, as we kind of think about this section, just to wrap up this, where are we, as a community? Where are we as individuals, and where do we need to align more closely with God's laws and seek His cleansing and His forgiveness? So, I am going to stop sharing there. Okay, gonna undo this. It's 8:00, so I think probably the easier thing to do is to not move on to the next section and start that next week, so we don't chop up yet another one. But other thoughts? I've done a lot of talking. Let's have some other people do some talking for a little bit.
When you were talking about the Catholics, I was thinking about how we used to joke that you just got to do your 3 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers and you're good.
Right.
So it's like no pain, no effort.
Yeah. I mean, that's a challenge. I think, you can go, there's 2 ways you could go, it's either it's cheap, or, in some ways it's been forgotten. And I think the challenge that we have as Christians is to kind of, embrace the atonement that Jesus had given us, but at the same time, remember, understand, and appreciate what that really means and how things go. Any other thoughts? Any other passing comments?
Hey, Sue, when you talk to Will, I read on the newsreel that Pete Rose died today. He was
Oh,
80.
I haven't looked at his, I haven't been able
Yeah.
to do anything.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was 83, died in his home in Las Vegas.
Oh, that's a shame. That was a person who's been wrong.